a trans girl, and I share the parts of her story that she allows me to share with permission every single time. That's important for me to say. And this is Eliza, and she just graduated from high school this year, and I'm so proud of who she is. And this is what gender affirming care looks like.
Well, here's the story. And this is the funny story as well. So, we had our third child was born, and had that father. But the baby came out, I had to check twice. We were so sure it was going to be. But then the girl was early at the time, and my youngest arrived in the house, mother, and loved hanging with the boys. I went to elementary school, and was always hanging with the boys. And wanted to hair cut short, actually an older boy than hair long. And then but then short again. Every year at Easter and on Christmas Eve, you had to wear a dress. Wear a dress. And then I would hope, I think that's my son would say that elementary school is a good time. But the middle school came around, started having all these stomach issues. Like a bunch of different doctors. And finally, I called you a psychiatrist, what is happening here? And that's some meditation techniques that helped, but never really went away. Didn't really understand what's going on. Puberty was going on, for sure. And my youngest was developing stress. Frankly, I remember the day that he got his face off. In front of me was a 13-year-old kid, gorgeous, big smile. And I took a picture, and I filled out the picture. And whenever he saw that picture, he said, I really don't like the way I look in that picture. He couldn't see himself in the mirror. And he hadn't found the vocabulary to express what was going on yet. But thankfully he did. At the end of middle school, which was really trying time for him, started understanding that gender was part of it, was where his comfort came from. And started finding himself, and so started to find her almost 24 hours a day. Finally convinced him to get off that, at least. But couldn't participate in sports, couldn't participate in PE, went to one of these urban schools with lots of levels, which was going upstairs, one of them tiring. And as a family, we came together and started having conversations about what this meant. And he started realizing that the reason he didn't look in the mirror was because he wasn't a girl. He couldn't, and he started experimenting with cutting his hair, and it was like a world opened up once he found that space. And so the care came later, but it was really this, as a family, as a reality, in a way, my son is a boy. And I wish I had a picture. I wish he were here. He's off in Europe with his girlfriend. I don't even agree with her together, so he can't be here with us. Yeah. It's a journey for our family. It was a journey for us. It was hard for us as parents. I thought I had a tomboy. I thought I had a tomboy who was a badass kid. I was so proud of that kid. That's the way that girls would be in the world. Strong, powerful, awesome. And that wasn't who he was. And I had to accept that as a parent. That would work for me, for sure. But his proof was just, he's such a vibrant, smart kid. Sprayed his entire life. Doing great, and it's been such a wonderful transformation for him now. He's just blossomed in all the GI issues he's been diagnosed with.
Natalie and Max for sharing those stories of your wonderful story. It's really clear how important your love is for your kids and for your whole families. And having a transgender journey, having a transgender child is a journey for parents, for families, and it's okay not to know everything at the outset. The important thing to do is to listen and to love and to seek to understand. And I heard from you that young people often know very early that they are transgender, and you have now had many years to enjoy your young people, to enjoy your kids, and to see the really positive effects that your love as parents has had for your kids. And you mentioned also some of the medical care that eventually, as after several years in your journeys, your kids were able to receive. And so I want to turn Dr. Eugene and Dr. Genford to you to ask you a little bit about what does healthcare for transgender young people look like? What does it start? What does it start? What does it look like? Dr. Genford, what does it start with?
This microphone. Okay. That was it. Good morning, thanks for being here. Yeah, I'd love to talk about what essential healthcare for transgender young people looks like. As Dr. Baker mentioned, I've been a pediatrician for 20 years, and so I think that should really work just to talk about what pediatric healthcare looks like. And so my work as a pediatrician really always starts with, what is that? What is the research out there? What is the scientific evidence? Has that been put into some kind of a clinical or treatment guideline that I can follow? And then I'm seeing a young person in front of me who has something that they need help with, a condition or something that needs some kind of treatment or intervention or advice, and they're often with their parents or guardians. And we talk about that evidence, and we talk about what medical decision is going to happen. The parents bring their experience and knowledge about their child into the room. And then we can work as a team to determine what's best for that particular child. That's what pediatric healthcare looks like. That is what essential healthcare for trans youth looks like. It's a little different than any other type of pediatric care that I provide to young people. What you heard in the parents' story is largely what I hear from parents, and what becomes really visible when you're listening to them is that so much of their journey as parents has nothing to do with me and with healthcare. And that's really true for the healthcare itself. Well, a lot of what I'm doing is, helping parents like Allie navigate the challenging parts. It's about talking and giving resources and helping parents understand their child's development. I'm an expert in child development as a pediatrician. That's what I can help with. That's all we do for young people until they get to be adolescents. So when young people enter adolescence and enter puberty, then we can have conversations about what we do in puberty and what type of puberty is going to be best for that child. And if we're not sure, we can pause it. And we use medications to reversibly pause puberty around the time of adolescence that are used in much younger children to pause their puberty when it happens too soon. So these are well-known, well-studied medications that are, again, reversible. And then when we get to older adolescents, we can have conversations about what type of pubertal changes that older adolescent would like to go through that will align who they are with their future self. And we can talk about hormone therapy. All of those things take a lot of time. They involve parents every step of the way. Speaking of pediatric care, I can't even see a child for a pediatric visit without parental consent. give vaccines, I can't do checkups, I can't do any of that. So parents are involved. If we're going to do a medical treatment, which is not a part of care for every transgender young person, we go through lists of benefits, and there's a really involved informed consent process around it. Again, just like there would be for any other type of medical care. And so, you know, to summarize, I would say it is not unlike other care for young people. It is evidence-based, it is long-standing. It involves all the same processes and procedures that protect parents and young people in all of healthcare. And fortunately, what we know is that it really helps kids thrive. It really helps them be the happiest, best versions of themselves and go on to grow up to be their authentic selves and adults that, you know, as you heard from Hans and Allie, really are doing quite well. And so that'll be kind of just a broad sort of overview, but I'll let Dr. Eugene speak as well.
Thank you, Dr. Geffler. So I want to add that, and even say that gender affirming care is practiced at the highest standards of care. It's patient and family centered, looking at the patient and the family as the patient and the one that's the recipient of the care. It's ethical. It is values the autonomy of the young person and the autonomy of the parents as the guardianship child. It is non-maleficent, so that basically means do no harm. The medications, the treatments, the care is safe. It exemplifies justice. Gender affirming care is actually access to gender affirming care for child for some families, whether about the patient or expertise in the area or by social and political areas that, you know, come to create feelings of stigma and shame and isolation that prevents someone from feeling ready to come out and then be supported through transition with a medical provider. Gender affirming care is individualized as the best care is according to the child needs and the family's needs, according to the child and the family's timeline. Centering the child most of that timeline because everyone's gender identity formation and development of gender identity is different. And so we need to be able to be mindful and supportive, and as Amy Parrott said earlier, work with the young person and the family to align their goals according to their timeline to see what they're looking for when they are transitioning. The care is also informed care as well, so we informed consent process, which again demonstrates the value of value of autonomy. So we let people know about the medications and the changes to expect and look forward to. I can say that this care is so moving and powerful because it touches on every critical part of the youth development and life. We support them in social transition, which is how they express their gender, how they engage in activities that further express and substantiate their gender. We support schools in being most inclusive. We provide education to parents and families. We support the gender identity, development of the young person, moreover, the social development and physical development of the young person through gender affirming care. It is holistic care, and that is how care should be. And let's go back to where I started. This is the care that demonstrates the highest standards of care within medicine.
I have one thing. As I was listening to my colleague talk about gender affirming care, I just wanted to address that language for a second. I know why we talk about gender affirming care. I know how we got to that language because we started in a place place of trying to change or fix someone's gender identity. And so that's how that language came about. But it's really come to bother me over time as a pediatrician because I don't talk about asthma care as like pulmonary affirming care. Or I don't talk about, vaccines as immune affirming care. Like, but that is what we're doing, right? We're optimizing the outcomes for young people. But when we use that language of affirming, it almost implies that somehow we're influencing. And that's not the case at all. And really, this is healthcare. So it is healthcare that is essential and effective for transgender young people, just like any other type of healthcare. It's kid affirming care. Let's say that. Kid affirming care.
If everybody can hold the microphone right here, even as you turn your head, that will help our live stream audience hear.
Repeat that.
Hold the microphone right here, even when you turn your head. Correct.
Yeah, thank you so much for saying that. And it, the answer is, it is accepting the child as who they are, and who they share who they are in their experience. We feel grateful that parents and young people come to us to seek care. Again, we talk about the journeys that Ellie and Ron shared. They've seen years and years and years of their child develop and grow and come into themselves before they seek medical care. And even at that first appointment, we're learning more about the family. We're learning more about the kid. The care is interdisciplinary. So we have support and guidance from, psychologists, therapists, other medical providers, so that, we are most thoughtful about meeting the young person and the family's needs so that the child can grow and continue to be exactly who they are and be the best self version of that.
Thank you, Dr. Eugene and Dr. Gedford. And I think that conversation is so emblematic of the multidisciplinary conversations that happen, the years and years that it takes to talk through the needs of a young person, to consult with multiple healthcare providers, to consult with mental health professionals. These are conversations that take time. And the standard of parental consent, as you were noting, is the same for any type of other care. And I think that's one of the biggest sort of misunderstandings, is how long these conversations take and what types of conversations parents and healthcare providers and young people are having. And I would ask you, Allie and Hans, from your perspective, what did those conversations look like in terms of seeking healthcare? What was that process like for you and your families and your children?
It's a long process. It's a lot when you think about, I have to take my kid to the dentist every 6 months, and then on top of it, I have to go to a pediatrician and endocrinologist, all of that. It is overwhelming. And I'm so grateful that there are professionals who dedicate their entire professional life to figuring out the right thing to do for kids. And as supportive as I am of my daughter, if it weren't the right thing to do, I wouldn't do it. Full stop. I didn't have consistently still evidence that this is the right thing to do, both socially and medically, I wouldn't do it. And I am so grateful that I'm not in charge of making those decisions fully as a parent, because I'm not a medical professional, but I'm a parent. And so it is really important that every step of the way I have said, okay, here's Eliza's story, here's what she wants, and what is responsible, what is the best for her health-wise. And so it took going to doctors and also getting her a therapist who understood trans identities and having a lot of conversations. It is not a, you show up and, oh, let's put you on blockers. Ever. That is never how any medical diagnosis or situation happens, and the same is true for Eliza's gender identity. And I'm really grateful for that, even though it is a lot. There are so many safety nets. So anytime along the way, if it weren't the right thing, if any of us decided it weren't the right thing, it would not have happened. And I think that takes a lot of pressure off of me. But I also do love that I, as a parent, have a say. And so it is important that I listen, that I get advice, that I talk to different doctors. We've lived in many different places, in several conservative states, and so it has been really important to find, doctors who are affirming, but who have experience treating trans kids. Like that really is the bottom line, is finding doctors with experience and then listening to them and then doing the right thing based on their advice. I also, Eliza's not allowed to be whoever she is. Like, she has to be a good person. She has to make choices that help make the world a better place. So I'm not the type of parent who's like, yeah, she just gets to do whatever. I think sometimes we think that gender is like this thing that, well, our kids, we just don't know. Gender is one of those things, but she gets to decide. And that is true for everyone. So it's not that she gets to be whoever she is, and then I just have to accept that. And I know enough about gender, we, the professionals, know enough about gender, that it is something that I get to say, okay, you know who you are, I then will help. I think of myself as like a barrier removal, like I'm removing these obstacles for her, and the medical side of that is one of those ways that I provide her with that, with the opportunity to get that care.
So when our son came out to us as trans, we did what I think most parents do, which is freak out. Scary, and especially in the world that we're in, it's scary. And yet, we had to listen to our kid. We had to trust our kid. We knew our kid, and it wasn't inconsistent with who he was at all. It made some amount of sense, but it was also like, it wasn't really the answer that I wanted, frankly. So we started doing a ton of research, my wife and I, and we started thinking about assembling a team of people to help us with that problem. What was seen as a problem at the time, I'll get to that in a moment, because the language is intentional, because it is intentional, right? It felt like a problem. It felt like, oh my gosh, my world is ending a little bit. Like, what am I going to do? What happened to my kid? Where did my kid go? So we did a bunch of research. We found a bunch of other parents. And if you look for parents, not the most trending on TikTok, if you look for other parents of transgender kids, you'll find a lot of people who really love their kids. I mean, I've met so many parents of transgender kids, and they all just love their kids, and they want what's best for their kids, and they have happy families. Anyway, I don't know what you call the folks yesterday. Sorry. Okay. So we sought out a therapist to work with our youngest, and he was older than the youngest kid. And so that to me was really a priority, was to have someone work through it with our youngest. And we met with a therapist as well, together as a family, or some met offline, or together one-on-one, and then back when we met again as a family, we met separately with the therapist. It was an entire process. It took nearly a year, I would say, before we did anything beyond just talking about it. We really had to understand it. And during that year, our family came together, 5 of us, 2 older sons, my wife and I, like, you wouldn't believe. I mean, it was like, our family was reknit and rebuilt, and we are a stronger, tighter family. I wish every parent had a transgender kid, because it's like the best thing that happened in our life, seriously. And once we had gone, we really come to understand as a family and as parents, because as a parent, it's our decision, right? I mean, as what care our kid's going to get. We have to sign up on that. And we started meeting with some doctors And we vetted many doctors, we talked to a bunch of different endocrinologists, and it's difficult work to find doctors to do this kind of work, and you have to really understand them and trust them because your kid is the most precious thing in your life. And we came to them with what we were looking for. It wasn't that they tried to convince us of anything ever. So, after so many meetings and so many conversations with folks and so much research, it was clear that hormones were the right solution for Nico. It has been life-changing for him. And I'm just so glad we made that decision with family. And when we made it as a family, we made it as parents, and we engaged the medical team to support us in that endeavor. And so the notion that somehow there are doctors trying to convince my family to do things is completely absurd. It doesn't at all match any of my experience or any experience of folks I've talked to. Because we as parents know our kids know themselves. We listen to them, we challenge them, we parent them. Part of parenting is to ask their kid, are you sure? Tell me about this, tell me why. Let's talk about what's going to happen when you do this. Let's talk about the consequences of this, especially as an older kid. My son was 15, 16, when he started transitioning. There were very real conversations. They were difficult. They were around, let's understand what this means. And there was no, I am sure he wished he could just walk into a clinic and get the care that he wanted, but we had to go through a process not only internally with family, but also with medical community.
Thank you both for sharing that. I'm not sure this mic is on. It's not. It's a great problem.
Thank you. There we go. Thank you all for sharing your stories and sharing those experiences about the safety nets, the multiple safety nets that exist for transgender young people and their families, for the healthcare providers, the partnerships that healthcare providers work in and with parents and families and transgender young people. And a lot of that reflects, of course, the type of disinformation, the type of inaccurate perceptions that are so often held in the public about transgender young people and what care for transgender young people looks like. And I think speaking to some of those misperceptions is very important as people with actual expertise in parenting transgender young people and in providing healthcare to children generally, to young people generally, not just to transgender young people. And I wonder, Dr. Gephardt and Dr. Eugene, if you can speak to what are some of the most prevalent myths and misconceptions about transgender young people and care for transgender young people that you think it's important for people to understand better? The first I'll start with is that it's harmful, or to say our care is ethical, it's non-maleficent, it does not cause harm to a kid. Moreover, I want to emphasize that actually testosterone and estrogen, the hormones that we use are actually safer than most of the other medications because they are biologically similar to what, biologically identical, let me be very clear on it, biologically identical to what is made naturally in the body. So there is no harm. And in fact, there's actually wonderful benefits. It is actually one of the most meaningful experiences of being a doctor because everyone gets better. I have seen patients who have been suicidal in and out of psychiatric hospitals. They start hormones that are affirming to who they are, and you see a true version of themselves. Not the young person that was having challenges, but a young person who is thriving. And don't we all want to see young people thrive? The family gets better. As Hans was saying, again, we work with patients and families. The relationship of the parent and the child is critical, not just in gender affirming care, but also across all all medical care in pediatrics. And so being able to see how much better and wonderfully well kids are after receiving care, and whatever care they choose that is important to their goals for how they manifest and see their body reflect what's on the inside.
There are so many myths that it's a little bit hard to know where to start, but I think I want to start with one of the most important ones to me. And this is a myth that was repeated by Justice Roberts in the Scarmetti decision. Justice Roberts stated in the Scarmetti decision that there is vigorous scientific debate about this care. That is false. There is not vigorous scientific debate about this care. There is vigorous political debate about this care. This care has become politicized as a political tool to gain attention and to further marginalize a small group of kids who were already struggling. Within the scientific community, it is clear that this healthcare is effective, it is safe, it results in better outcomes for young people. All major medical organizations in this country endorse this care because there are decades of research on tens of thousands of young people and adults, all showing the same outcomes. When I first began to hear that transgender young people were becoming political targets, I thought for sure it was going to go away immediately because of all of the evidence that shows that the care that we are providing is safe and effective and life-changing and life-saving. And as the debate sort of heated up, so did the positive evidence for this care. You know, in 2022, a study in JAMA Pediatrics talking about the decreased suicidality rates and decreased depression for kids. In 2023, a study in the British Journal of Medicine talking about decreased rates of anxiety and depression. You know, over and over again, this is replicated. And what I didn't account for was the power of intentional disinformation in the media and in politics that does not pay attention to what is scientifically true and factual. I think the other big piece of disinformation that I want, I mean, you've heard about, you know, care for young kids is talking and helping with resources and, you know, helping families navigate all of the challenges of schools and families and all of that. Any medical care is talked through with consent, with parents. All parents, by the way, deserve the right to be the medical decision makers for their child. All parents, not the government. I am a parent. I want to be the primary medical decision maker for my child. I don't want politicians or the government interfering in my ability to decide what is best for my child. So parents are the medical decision makers every step along the way. So you've heard that. I think the other big myth and disinformation that's out there is they're trying to take this care that is so in line with all of pediatrics and make it seem different. Make it seem like it is somehow an outlier. And that is just simply not the case. In all of pediatrics, for example, we use off-label medications. That is very common. 1 in 3 prescriptions that is written for a child is an off-label medication prescription. That is because we cannot ethically do the types of medication trials in young kids that we can do in adults. We are commonly used to extrapolating adult data. We are used to having such a small patient population of disease that we can't have high enough powered study to do these types of trials. So the way that we care for kids in this type of medicine is the exact same way that we care for kids in all of pediatric medicine. So I think that's the other thing I really want to push back on, because we're living in this kind of scary time where the science and the 25 plus years that I have spent studying medicine and understanding science and research is becoming less valuable in the discussion. And I think that's a scary trend for pediatrics in general. As a pediatrician, I want to pay attention to what is real and true, and and what is based in evidence and the way that we've always practiced medicine.
Thank you, Dr. Eugene, for those thoughtful reflections on how much disinformation is out there, how difficult it can be for people to understand the realities on the ground for families, for transgender young people themselves, for the healthcare providers who care for them. And I wonder, Franz and Ali, if you can bring us towards the end of this panel with some reflections about how this environment has affected you and your families. This is a very widespread phenomenon. There's a lot of voices talking about transgender young people and their families, and very few people talking to or listening to transgender young people and their families, their parents who care for them, who have been with them on these journeys. And I wonder if you can speak to how that affects you as a parent and as a person.
Well, first I'm going to speak to how it affects Eliza. She's 18. She is, of course, addicted to her phone. And so she is seeing all of this. And that really hurts my heart because on the one hand, being trans is the least interesting thing about her. And really, she's known that her whole life. And that is true in her school, that is true with her family. Like, she walks through the world as a girl, and that's wonderful. And she is seeing what is happening, and while she knows that her parents will do whatever we need to do to make sure that she continues to get the life-saving care, and I know that to be true in my bones, that it is life-saving care, that if she didn't get it, she wouldn't be alive. I also, once in a while, she'll say, okay, so what would happen if I couldn't get my prescriptions? Like, so she's thinking about it, even though she has all these years of like, okay, my parents have supported me, everything's gonna be fine. She sees what's happening, and it's hard for her to separate it from, you know, her. It's hard. It comes into her life, and I hate that. And so that's how it has affected her, and therefore, of course, as her mom, it has affected me. It is devastating. It's devastating that I've always thought, okay, we're doing the right thing because it's the right thing, and we have lots of evidence that this is the right thing. And if you know Eliza, if you know her story, you would totally support gender-affirming care. And I really believed that that's all it would take, those two things. Know a trans person and their journey, and also just dive a little bit into the research, and you'll see, and that's all you need. And I need that to be true. We need that to be true so that our kids can continue to live.
Our community is terrified. I've connected to a lot of parents through my years of shepherding Nico through his journey. And every single day, it seems someone is getting ready to move out of the country because they can't imagine a future here, given the world that's being created only a mile away from us. So that absolutely, my son as well has one of these handheld things, and absolutely knows what's going on in the world. I was disappointed to find out that he already had an emergency stash of cash in his sock drawer in case he needed to make some drastic changes suddenly. And it's really unconscionable being 19-year-olds who are supposed to be the peak of their life and youth, and having going to school and having a good time, and involved in clubs and having a girlfriend, and yet also having in the back of his mind is thinking, what do I need to get out of here? What's my escape plan? Where's my passport? And that goes for the whole family. And it's unconscionable that our government is participating in such a blatant, one-sided conversation around what we parents are going through. And so I need to show up. right? That's, I guess, what, and frankly, my son feels the need to show up as well, and he does, and he's not in Europe with, with his girlfriend. So, gender affirming care for transgender people, is just healthcare. And the government doesn't get involved in trying to decide, okay, should youth actually be able to get kidney transplants? Because there's risk of a kidney transplant, and let's have a conversation about kidney transplants, and let's have an entire hearing that only talks to folks whose kids had a bad outcome of kidney transplants. There is so much evidence, and not just the personal lived experience here, but just the scientific evidence, is that this care really works for people. Gender affirming care is just health care, and that's what our government needs to understand, is there's so much evidence out there, and absolutely people, as Emily said, people just need to know a transgender person, know a transgender kid, know a family with a transgender kid, and we're all here, we're ready to talk, and come listen to us, and get to know us, and then you'll understand why we feel so strongly about gender affirming care.
Thank you so much, Ali and Hans. What a beautiful note to end on. I want to thank you for everything that all four of you are doing to love and care for transgender young people. That is what this is all about. It is about listening to young people. It is about listening to families. It is about following the medical consensus and scientific evidence. It gives us those guideposts for how can we make sure that every young person, including trans young people, are safe and healthy and well, and set up to thrive, not just in adolescence, but beyond. I'm going to go to Europe. I'm so glad that your son is having a good time in Europe, because that is what we all want for transgender young people. We want them to be able to dream of their bright futures. We want them to be able to live those bright futures without the storm clouds that have recently been gathering so heavily around all of us here and in communities across the country. So I just want to say thank you again. Please join me in applause.
Thank you, everyone. I want to acknowledge we have two members of Congress who have very kindly shared videos expressing their perspectives on what is happening now in terms of not only the politicization of the FTC itself, but also the ongoing attacks on transgender young people and their families. I want to thank Representative Maxwell Cross and Representative Jamie Raskin. We will be including the videos in the video of the live stream in order to keep our panel in person together here, our conversation in person here going forward expeditiously. So Shay, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you all. So at this point, I would like to invite Eileen Harrington, the former executive director of the FTC, up to read an incredible prepared statement. Eileen does not know this, but I've lovingly been calling her the mother of the workshop. And perhaps no one better suited to talk about why yesterday was a misapplication of the workshop format and the FTC mandate. While that's happening, I would also like to invite the panelists for our second panel to come up and join me, of which I think will be a part. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kay. I want to say how honored and really humbled I am to be here with you all today. What amazing goodness is in this room. So my name is Eileen Harrington. I'm a retired federal civil servant and senior executive. I had the privilege of serving at the Federal Trade Commission from 1984 through 2012. And during my FTC career, I held a number of positions, mostly in the Bureau of Consumer Protection. I was a staff attorney, an assistant director, a regional director, the associate director for marketing practices, the deputy director of the Bureau of Consumer Protection, the acting bureau director in the Bureau of Consumer Protection, and finally the executive director at the Federal Trade Commission. I received the Service to America Medal for my role in creating the National Do Not Call Rule and Registry, and the President of the United States conferred on me the rank of Distinguished Executive, which is the highest honor that can be given to a career civil servant. I'm simply accrediting myself here as somebody who knows something about the Federal Trade Commission and about the career civil service. I'm here today speaking solely for myself. I bought my own plane ticket to come here from Wisconsin. I feel really strongly about this. So yes, the mother of the workshop. It's true. In 1982, I feel like I'm the grandmother of this event. Like I got old. But in 1992, I was the director of the Division of Marketing Practices at the FTC. We were beginning a rulemaking, the first one that had been done at the FTC for quite a while. And we gave careful thought to how to do what Paris talked about. I don't know where Paris is, but what an amazing talk that was. We wanted to make sure that in doing the rulemaking that we were setting out on, that we developed the fullest public record possible and encouraged public and vigorous debate on the issues that would be dealt with. And so a group of attorneys in my division and in the General Counsel's office at the Federal Trade Commission developed a format for what we call a public workshop conference. The purpose of that tool was to encourage public participation and transparency and the creation of the fullest public record possible to inform and support the important regulatory work that the FTC was setting out on. Up until yesterday, as far as I know, the elements that we inserted as essential in that first public workshop conference have remained bedrock in Federal Trade Commission workshops. Now, I think there was some deviation recently when, as I understand it, Chair Ferguson sort of took over a workshop that had been scheduled on the information economy, and that may have been the first deviation, but yesterday, totally off the rails as far as I'm concerned. The purpose of an FTC workshop, as I said, is to create a full public record to aid in important policy deliberations. The workshop process over the last 33 years traditionally has begun with the FTC issuing some kind of public statement about the topic to be explored through a public workshop conference and an invitation from the FTC to the public to submit comments on the topic and responses to questions perhaps posed in the announcement. The point is to give all stakeholders an opportunity to express their views, and then from those written submissions from stakeholders, the FTC staff would invite people to participate as panelists, making sure that every point of view expressed is represented in the workshop discussions. One of the things that when we designed the workshop we thought would be most valuable and really has been is that stakeholders who participate can challenge each other and can challenge each other's submissions. And we believe when we created the public workshop conference that those stakeholders invariably would know a whole lot more about the subject at hand than we lawyers and economists at the FTC do. I mean, we do something, but stakeholders live it. They know a lot, and we were really interested in what they had to say and how they could challenge each other. So that is how workshops operate at the FTC. Yesterday's event bears little resemblance to what we intended to create back in 1992 and to what the FTC has done over the years. The public was barred from in-person attendance. What? This is the public's business. The FTC pick people who were allowed to speak, and they represented only one point of view. The so-called workshop was a platform for one point of view, a propaganda platform. Process really matters. Good government process is democratic. It invites all views to be presented. It encourages questioning and discussion among and between proponents of various points of view. In contrast, authoritarian government allows one point of view and bars public participation. That's what we saw yesterday. Now, turning to the FTC's Consumer Protection Mission, the FTC's suggestion that it should insert itself into the doctor-patient relationship goes against the Commission's position, loudly proclaimed more than 45 years ago, that its mission and authority do not extend to the doctor-patient relationship. In its 1980 Second Circuit appeal in American Medical Association versus Federal Trade Commission, a decision that was subsequently affirmed by the United States Supreme Court, the FTC argued in its briefs and in oral argument that it would not and should not attempt to impinge upon the doctor-patient relationship, but rather should assert its authority only over deceptive advertisements that mislead consumers in their consideration of health-related products and services. And since that landmark decision in AMA versus FTC, the FTC has brought hundreds of advertising and marketing cases challenging false, misleading, or unsubstantiated claims made by producers and marketers of healthcare products, and in some instances by product providers of health-related services. These cases challenge claims made through a variety of media, including print, radio, television, online, mass, email, and telemarketing campaigns, but to my knowledge, not a single case brought by the FTC to challenge deceptive advertising in the healthcare space has involved conversations and consultations between licensed physicians and their patients or guardians during medical appointments. Not a single case, not one that I know of. Now, this is not to say that legal oversight of interactions between licensed physicians and their patients is lacking. To the contrary, the practice of medicine in the United States is highly regulated by each state. Physicians must be licensed by the state in which they meet with their patients. That includes telehealth visits. In addition, as is well known, there is private enforcement through tort and malpractice actions. It's available as a remedy and serves as a deterrent to misconduct by medical practitioners. The FTC's Consumer Protection Mission does not extend to legal oversight and regulation of the doctor-patient relationship, period. And now, it's really interesting to me to look at the arguments that are teed up today and think about a different time that really was pretty formative for the modern Federal Trade Commission, and that is the FTC's foray into regulatory overreach during the 1970s. The Reagan-era Commission, in response to the 1970s episode of overreach, wrote in 1984 an unfairness policy that sought to cabin and define the FTC's unfairness authorities under Section 5 of the Federal Trade Commission Act. For a practice to be unfair, the Commission opined, the Commission has to prove, among other things, that the practice causes unavoidable harm to the consumer. The focus is on economic harm, and as we know, medical procedures that are performed for patients by licensed physicians require the informed consent of the patient or their guardian. If a physician has described a medical practice and the patient or their guardian has consented, I think it is extremely difficult for the FTC to argue that harms that may have been suffered are unavoidable. Informed consent undercuts the unavoidability argument, in my view. Now, in announcing yesterday's event, and at yesterday's event, the FTC opined that if physicians misrepresent or fail to disclose possible outcomes of gender-affirming care to be provided when they obtain informed consent, that the FTC could assert its deception authority. I wonder, though, how the FTC would go about investigating conversations that take place between physicians and their patients without violating HIPAA. And the FTC holds itself out as the privacy agency. Really? So, in the 1970s, the FTC was loudly criticized, as I mentioned, for statutory and regulatory overreach after it launched a whole bunch of rulemakings. And the most notorious of those was the so-called kid bid rulemaking. And in that rulemaking, the FTC sought to ban the advertising of sugary cereals to kids. Critics argued at the time that parents and not the FTC should decide what their kids eat for breakfast. The FTC became known as the national nanny for trying to insert itself into the debate about what kids should have for breakfast. So I think it's really ironic today that we have the Department of Health and Human Services telling all of us what we should eat for breakfast, not just kids, and the FTC trying to tell parents what kind of health care their kids should receive. Wow. Apparently, the only authority that these people think parents should have is in deciding public school curriculum. Things have really changed. So, this is overreach way beyond the national nanny's attempt to prevent kids from eating sugary cereal. And I'll note that in response to that overreach, not only did the Commission in 1984 issue its policy statement on unfairness to really impose some self-discipline on how it used its statutory authority, but then Congress later wrote that policy statement into the statute. So yesterday, in attempting to usurp the role of parents and guardians in determining what health care is best for their kids, the FTC engaged in a kind of overreach that we haven't seen for over 50 years. And it's not as if the FTC is clueless about what it should be doing. Every year, the FTC publishes a report gleaned from data compiled in its Consumer Sentinel database of consumer complaints. This is the world's largest repository of consumer complaint data. The FTC created Consumer Sentinel. I was involved in creating that to capture these complaints to not just the FTC, but to all states, the Better Business Bureaus, the District of Columbia, trade associations, everybody. And last year, the FTC received 6.5 million complaints that were logged by Consumer Sentinel, and in its annual report, it reports on those. Now, one of the reasons we created Consumer Sentinel was to prioritize allocation of resources. So you look at the complaints, you say, wow, we're getting a lot of complaints about this causing a lot of economic harm. We need to target resources there. Isn't that the kind of smart and efficient targeting of government resources that we all want? So in 2024, as I mentioned, there were more than 6.5 million complaints logged in the Consumer Sentinel, and over 60% of those complaints concerned one of three subjects: credit reporting agencies and credit reports, imposter scams, and identity theft. Over 60%. I read the FTC's 2024 report really carefully, and I found no reference at all to any consumer complaints about gender-affirming care. Not a single mention. So using its own data, the FTC certainly should know where to target its limited resources. And looking to the arguments that it made in 1980 and has adhered to ever since, it should know that its position always has been that the FTC would not and could not impinge on the doctor-patient relationship. Looking to the FTC's own unfairness policy statement and HIPAA, the FTC should admit that its statutory authority to investigate medical treatment discussions and decisions that take place between doctors and their patients is dubious at best. Today's gathering is providing a large portion of the record that should have been made at yesterday's workshop held by the FTC. Sadly, yesterday's events instead mark, in my view, the FTC's descent into anti-democratic authoritarianism. May the FTC quickly realize the error of its ways, get back into its lane, and focus on economic harms to consumers. That's what it was created to address. And with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau suddenly sidelined, and I hope we talk about that a little in our panel on what that means for the FTC. The FTC's role as our nation's oldest and premier consumer protection agency has never been more important. So let's get to it, FTC. Thank you.
That's my All right. Thank you for joining for our second panel, which we are calling Protecting People, Not Power. So this panel is meant to focus on, not only the harms that were caused by the misappropriation of FTC attention yesterday to that particular topic, but to now kind of focus on what would a more effective FTC actually look like, because we know that all of that attention yesterday happened in lieu of many other places where the FTC should actually be interceding. So my name is Shay Gardner. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Director of Policy and Research at LGBT Tech. We work at the fantastic intersection of technology and LGBTQ+ advocacy. Digital spaces are where members of our community can overcome the tremendous social and economic barriers that they face, but only if access to those online spaces is both autonomous and safe. So that's a quick elevator pitch for me and for what we do, but this actually isn't about me. So I'm going to turn to our three phenomenal panelists here who are very powerful voices in this space. And I'm going to ask each of you to briefly introduce yourself and kind of your interest in this particular panel, day, topic area. I'm going to repeat yourself, Eileen. But for now, I'm going to start with Alan Butler, the Executive Director and President of FTC.
Thanks, Shay, and thanks for the opportunity to speak today. I'm Alan Butler, Executive Director at the Electronic Privacy Information Center. I use he/him pronouns, and I'm here to help aid the conversation about what the FTC should be doing. FX has been around for 30 years, working to secure the right to privacy online for all people, and I've interfaced in many different capacities with the Federal Trade Commission, which is, as has been mentioned by me and others, the regulator digital for privacy in the United States, and all things related to personal data. So we have a major interest in what the FTC is doing and should be doing, and I'm happy to be part of this conversation.
Hi, I'm Matthew Lane. I'm Senior Policy Counsel at Effect for the Future. We are a tech policy organization that fights to make sure the technology is a force for empowerment and not oppression. And a bit of my personal history, I did used to be a lawyer. I worked for a small firm that focused on consumer protection advocacy, and we often advocated before the FTC. I also worked on a lot of healthcare issues, so this has been very upsetting to me that a lot of the things that I worked on is being thrown aside for partisan and political nonsense.
I think I need to myself.
All right, I'm going to start with sort of a speed round question for the entire group and let you work your way down the line before asking some individual questions to different panelists. And firstly, today the conversation around yesterday's workshop has been a lot of the word no, and I want to make sure that at some point we're having a conversation that goes no and. So I want to start by asking y'all, what harms do you think the FTC should be addressing right now? And I'm going to go one step further and ask you, you have been in charge of planning yesterday's workshop. What would be the one issue that you would have planned around?
Thanks, Shay. I mean, the FTC's mandate is really broad and really important, right? The agency's been around for more than 100 years, trying to protect American consumers from financial harms, from abuse in various forms. I mean, just off the top of my head, right? I mean, obviously privacy issues are top of mind for us, but the agency's mandate is much broader than that. We think about the harms caused by, consolidation and monopolization of major industries that are resulting in raised prices and lower access to goods and services for all Americans. Use of algorithms against renters and workers and others, not to mention the issue of identity theft that I mentioned. There was an FBI report from just in the last few months that highlighted that elder scams in 2024 were up almost 50% over 2023, almost $5 billion in losses from elder scams alone. So I think that in terms of workshop topics, for me, top of mind would be really trying to get a handle on the data broker industry and all the abusive collection and sale of our personal information. But if we wanted to go narrower than that, I would say just elder scams alone are worthy of a workshop.
Well, if I were in charge of the FTC, we wouldn't have had the workshop that happened yesterday. So I have nothing to suggest that should have been included in a workshop that never should have happened, and it wasn't a workshop. I think that I would echo what was just said about the importance of data privacy. The FTC has held itself out since 1995 as the federal data privacy agency. There is an endless and tremendous amount of work to be done there. I've been really interested, actually, in the FTC's silence these past months on the question of data privacy and security as these DOGE people have gone plowing through agencies and grabbing data. The FTC has been really vocal for 30-some years about how everybody should handle data, right? Best practices, bringing lawsuits against private entities that mishandle data. Where has the FTC's voice been as people who aren't exactly government employees, I don't think, plow through agencies and pull data? I think elder scams are really important too because I'm an elder now, but I also receive Social Security and I'm really concerned about what's happened with my data at the Social Security Administration. The FTC, as the self-proclaimed privacy agency, has been silent, and I think that's shameful. So I think there are lots of things that I mentioned from Consumer Central that the FTC ought to be doing, but it also should reassert its voice as the leading federal agency on data privacy and say something about what is happening to all of the data being amassed by DOGE.
I'm going to ditto a lot of what Eileen said. First to address the original point, I don't think the workshop is appropriate at all. The FTC's mission is to focus on protecting people at the moment that they are consumers. And as we heard in the last panel, everyone would be so lucky to have a consumer relationship, such as, the trans families of trans kids get. And it'd be so hands-on and additive to their experience. When I worked in healthcare issues, it was largely around pricing. So pricing of insurance companies, competition among them, pricing of drug competition. And those are the types of healthcare issues the FTC is actually suited for. And so I don't think the workshop should have existed in this form. Now, with my fight hat on, we are strong proponents of any action against surveillance capitalism. We think that not only is a bad practice in terms of it's very exploitative to consumers, but the amassing of the amount of data required to engage in surveillance capitalism is also very dangerous. So things that we think the workshop should be focused on, or workshops at FTC, are things like data brokers. Like, for example, in recent political violence, there's been reporting that the shooter found address information from data brokers. Data brokers are notorious for not caring about who their customers are. And there has been an FTC study on data brokers, and there needs to be more FTC investigation of this. Another issue is the surveillance pricing, which is something that unfortunately we don't really know the extent to which it's going on. We know it's possible. We know that a lot of tech grows and executives have bragged about the possibility of having personalized pricing to maximally extract whatever dollar that you're willing to pay as an individual at the point of sale. But we just don't know how much is happening. We work with Consumer Reports. They're constructing consumer studies to try to fill in some of those gaps to figure out where it's happening and how prevalent it is. This is something that Chair Amy Ferguson actually put a stop to. The Land Plan FTC was doing a request for information about this, and that was closed under Amy Ferguson, which was very disappointing for us.
Thank you. I'm going to turn to some individual questions here, but I also want to clarify, I'm going to ask one person, they're going to answer, and then feel free to jump in, since I know there is, the Venn diagram has a whole lot of overlaps in this group. So I'm going to go to Ivy first, and looking at yesterday, we heard Chairman Ferguson claim the FTC has a clear mandate in this space by framing healthcare for transgender youth as quote-unquote deceptive in nature. But we also know that the FTC typically defers to other agencies in areas of specialized regulation. So I'm hoping you can kind of practically break down what those interagency liaison agreements look like, and how in this case the FTC is overstepping on an established practice.
Well, first of all, there isn't any question but that the Federal Trade Commission Act and Section 5 give the FTC very broad jurisdiction. So I think we need to stipulate to that. However, as I mentioned, the FTC itself asserted loudly in 1980 that it would not, could not, should not attempt to use that jurisdiction to impinge on the relationship between physicians and patients. And that has always been the Commission's position. The question about whether the FTC has the authority to regulate pharmaceutical companies who make prescription drugs that are used in connection with anything, not only gender affirming care, but anything. The FTC has ceded that possible authority in the liaison letters with the Food and Drug Administration. By statute, the FDA approves prescription medications and pharmaceuticals, and the FDA regulates the advertising of those, not the FTC. And so the FTC, to the extent that the FTC has used its Section 5 authority involving deceptive claims for healthcare products, it's been for over-the-counter and non-regulated substances like supplements. So the FTC doesn't get into that. The FTC also has a long history of acknowledging and respecting the role that state governments play in regulating the professions. There's a long history of FTC consideration and rejection of efforts to insert its regulatory authority with respect to the professions, not just the medical profession, but licensed professionals and professions that are regulated by the states. You know, the whole of government in the United States is a federalist system. And the Federal Trade Commission has always respected the role that the states play in our federalist government. And so those kinds of agreements and recognitions have been bedrock. The FTC is a teeny agency. It's got like 1,200 staff or something like that, at least it did when I retired, maybe more now, probably less, because I hear people are screaming out the doors. But you know, it's a teeny agency with this very broad jurisdiction and mandate. And it has a history of periodically overstepping. And so when you ask the question, well, what are the limits on the FTC's jurisdiction? On paper, it's very broad. But in practice, every time the FTC oversteps, at some point, somebody comes back and says, oh, no, not that. And then we have another data point about where the FTC's jurisdiction doesn't exist.
I think, you know, hearing that, I want to continue with kind of this theme of no and zoom out a little bit further and say that, you know, just because we are sitting here talking about how the FTC lacks authority in this sort of medical practice, that does not mean that the FTC lacks authority in the health space entirely. So I'm going to turn to you, Alan. EPIC has long supported some of the work the FTC has done on issues like health data protections. So I'm hoping you can elucidate a bit on, you know, in the healthcare spaces where the FTC can and actively should be involved to protect consumers.
Sure, thanks. And I think to get back to the point Matt raised earlier, the FTC, a big area of focus around healthcare is pricing. And there is this critical overlap right now of pricing and emergent algorithms and data collection and surveillance, commercial surveillance. This is an area of huge concern for many Americans as healthcare prices continue to increase and continue to eat away at their, you know, their nest egg, their bottom line. And so investigating the ways that these companies are collecting and amassing data to target people and charge them increased prices to try to extract the maximum rents from healthcare customers, I think is critically important. Not to mention the fact that Congress, despite its dysfunction, has passed a few focused privacy laws in the last few years. One of them, supported by current FTC leadership, has to do with data brokers selling people sensitive personal information, including health information, to foreign governments. FTC has a brand new, fresh authority there, and should be using it because the reality is that the commercial surveillance ecosystem is rife with this type of data abuse and misuse. And again, there's a new, fresh law in the books and authority that the FTC can and should assert there. And I'll plug that EPIC filed a really important complaint on the advertising surveillance ecosystem and the way that foreign government agencies buy the sensitive information there that demands an investigation.
I'm very glad you ended on that, because that actually segues perfectly right to what I wanted to say next, which is zooming out even a little bit further and turning to you, Matt. This is, health and data is such an important ecosystem to be involved in and to be improving, focusing on. And that is only one part of kind of the entirety of the ecosystem, in the digital ecosystem. So, I know your organization has consistently urged the FTC to look at some of these urgent digital harms, issues like surveillance targeting and doxing and, algorithmic harms. So I think And the question I want to ask is a little bit twofold. I want to ask you to expand a little bit on sort of those topics and generally the issues that we see in digital spaces where the FTC does have assigned authority, but then also break down for us a little bit why those are so important to members of the LGBT+ community. Because I think while we certainly know we were the center of yesterday's workshop, we were not centered in yesterday's workshop. And that is a group of consumers that deserves to have their concerns and their sort of unique harms addressed.
So the FTC has two primary hats, and one is on competition pricing, and the other is on consumer protection. And in that second bucket, privacy is a huge part of the responsibility. We are a moment in history in which it's really easy to collect data on people. It's really easy to share that data. It's really easy to sell that data. It's really easy to process that data. And I think that that is very scary for a lot of consumers. And it's also scary that we don't really know to what extent these companies are even doing that. And keep getting more and more reports that it's, scarier than we imagined. Going to your comment about how it's being sold to foreign countries. In that data, health data, I think, is the most sensitive for most people, and that's very important. I think that the other sort of piece of this is that we're also in a world in which AI is promising to be able to process and make predictions based on this data. And so not only is that potentially problematic in that corporations can do a better job of exploiting us and nudging us towards buying products or things we don't need or overcharging us, but there's another side of that that's not bad enough, and that's that a lot of these companies are sort of over-promising and putting out bad products that makes people's lives worse because they make mistakes. The FTC, not under Ferguson, but under the past administration, took action against people who were being wrongly flagged for shoplifting at drugstores based on technology that promised that they were going to be able to do this accurately. And I want to be clear, as an organization, we are anti-facial recognition at all. But, it is especially problematic if these are being used to target people unfairly and subjecting them to harm. To answer the second part of the question, a lot of our advocacy is based on making sure that the internet is a space where people can use it and it works for everyone in all communities. We have found, and we've worked with other organizations like Stories and collected reports, that especially for youth, the internet's a mixed bag, but there's a tendency for LGBTQ youth to need the internet more. That they are often not supported within their communities, and they need to connect to communities outside of their spaces in order to feel support or learn about themselves. And in that regard, those spaces need to be protected. And so, to the extent in which there is abusive data collection, monitoring, invasion of privacy, collecting personalized information, using them to, serve them content that they may not want or need, eventually out them to their parents when they're not ready. All of those things are incredibly problematic and, need to be addressed and looked at seriously.
Thank you. I'm going to turn back to Eileen and ask, I think yesterday's workshop really represented what is going to be another break of trust with the LGBTQ+ community, particularly the transgender community, who really does, let's be frank here, have a historic and an understandable distrust of government and government agencies. So I feel like I may be asking an impossible question here of you. But do you think that there are steps the FTC can and should be taking to rebuild that trust inevitably once they realize it has been further broken? If I were asking that question, I would say a time machine. So I know it's not an easy one, but I think what I'm asking you is if you were directing the FTC in this particular moment, how would you redirect them to mission-oriented priorities over what was happening yesterday?
I'm going to get to that question. but I want to follow up on my colleague's comment. I went to work at the FTC in 1984, and I took the job offer because the FTC offered me the opportunity to enforce a statute, the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, that prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex, marital status, race, national origin, receiving public benefits, other things. That statute and the work that the FTC did in enforcing it speaks to a long history of the Federal Trade Commission using its enforcement authority and policy-making authority to prevent practices that target people because of who they are. The FTC has a long record of having to protect people who are targeted because of who they are. Whether we are talking about elders who are subject to scams that target them because they are old, we are old, or target women, or people born in other countries or of different ethnicities, and on and on. And that includes, in my opinion, using the FTC's authority to act against conduct that targets people or their data because of who they are, whoever they are. That's a bedrock principle. Now, to answer your question, if I were directing the FTC, what might I do to restore trust? Two things. One, get back to good process. Good process is the bedrock of good government. People have reason to not trust their government if the process sucks. You know, if the process is secretive, if it's exclusive, if it's one-sided, if it's putting a thumb on the scale in the discussion of public policy to favor one group's interests over another, that destroys and undercuts trust, and good government process instills confidence. So I would get back to good process. And the other thing that I would do if I were in charge of the FTC would be to direct the whole agency to pay particular attention for consumer complaints and other evidence that comes in the door that suggests that people are being targeted because of who they are. That should be unacceptable at the Federal Trade Commission. So I do those two things.
Okay. This is a semi-similar question, I think, and I'm actually going to pose it to the group as a whole. It, I think, is no surprise to anyone that this conversation and this issue is just as personal for people as it is political in nature, and how unjust this feels to so many people already facing so many kind of trials and tribulations just by virtue of being who they are and wanting to live authentically. And frankly, I could have ended that sentence at just wanting to live. So I want to pose it to the group and throw your hand up who wants to answer first. What does regulation look like to you and enforcement authority look like to you when it is not just appropriate, it's not just compliant, but it is actually just as well?
I mean, one of the bedrocks, I think, of FIGHT is that we try to center the interests and voices of marginalized communities. Because, in a lot of situations, like when it comes to privacy, like everyone deserves privacy. But for certain communities, privacy is a matter of life and death, so quite literally. And so we always want to make sure that we are centering those types of perspectives and views in our work, and that we are responsible to them. And I think that when it comes to a lot of regulation, agency action, that they need to be listening to those voices as well, because oftentimes when there are unintended consequences, they always tend to fall on one community's shoulders, which is, LGBTQ, Black and brown communities, folks like that. they usually get the brunt of all the unintended consequences. And so I really would just urge for the government and Federal Trade Commission and stuff like that, like the types of voices that need to be making sure that they hear and that they need to be structuring regulations around are those that are the most likely to be negatively impacted if they go wrong.
And I would just add briefly that the FTC's founding, the creation of the agency really was around this trust fight and this David and Goliath position of the average consumer to these large corporate monopolies, and that problem is not going away. And the FTC is at its best when it's fighting for marginalized communities, when it's fighting for consumers that are targeted with extractive corporate behavior. And these problems are myriad right now. They're not reduced at all, and the agency needs to, fight for the global person, for lack of a better term.
I couldn't agree more. I think overall, the brunt of that policy will always fall on marginalized populations. And an agency that isn't willing to consider that is not considering the entirety of the populations it's meant to serve. I want to talk a little bit about this situation and what is happening in tandem with and in parallel with. And I'll be honest, I did not have a specific question prepared for this. This is me opening the door I need to talk a little bit about the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, because while, again, this is the intention and the intention of the FTC at this point, there are other issues happening at the same time that are really undercutting the ability for effective enforcement. And I would like you to explain a little bit what those are.
Sure. So I think everyone knows that the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau was kind of suddenly sidelined this year. And I was at the FTC, I was actually the acting director of the Bureau of Consumer Protection when the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau was created. And was at the table for the agency discussing how we were going to handle the kind of a handoff from the FTC to the CFPB for enforcement in certain areas, like, for example, enforcement of the Fair Credit Reporting Act. And before the creation of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the FTC was the federal agency that enforced that statute, but it didn't lose its authority in the creation of the CFPB, but it stepped back. Another one of these sort of intergovernmental agreements. There are various MOUs on this about what the CFPB would do, what the FTC would do. Well, there's no CFPB now. And as I mentioned, the #1 category of complaints by volume last year in Consumer Sentinel had to do with credit reporting agencies and credit reports. So what's happening right now for consumers whose credit reports are all kinds of messed up, who can't get credit reporting agencies to meet their statutory obligations to give consumers the opportunity to review their credit reports, to contest them? Who's doing that? Where's the FTC? They are a federal agency with that authority now, nobody else. Debt collection practices, always a problem. The FTC and the CFPB have collaborated in overseeing that industry. Now it's all on the FTC. And on. When we talk about consumer protection in the consumer financial services space, mortgage lending, credit scoring, things that really touch people every single day, touch everybody, whether they're on the left or the right or in the center. Consumer financial services have an enormous impact on the well-being of consumers, and now it's all on the FTC. So I would ask the question of the people running the FTC right now, like, what are you doing to beef up resources and get off the bench to police the consumer financial services space that the CFPB has left to itself right now? There are plenty of really important things that touch most people living in this country, whether they're in red states or purple states or blue states, there are areas where the FTC historically has collaborated with state AGs to protect consumers. I haven't seen anything from this FTC that says we are all about strengthening our collaboration with state AGs to protect our people. So, you know, especially I think, Shay, with the disappearance of the CFPB, the FTC resumes sole responsibility for the enforcement of a bunch of consumer protection laws and regulations that it didn't have to worry about as much over the past 14 years, but now it's all on the FTC.
Happening alongside massive reductions in government employees overall, so that's heartwarming. Eileen has directly addressed the FTC quite a bit throughout this panel, and I sort of want to extend the same opportunity to Alan and to Matt. And I want to ask, if you were to speak to the FTC directly, what do you want the FTC to hear, to see, to read from technologists, from advocates, from experts like yourselves, that they currently are not making the space to hear, to see, to read? And I'm gonna start with Matt.
You know, in my former practice, I did advocacy for the FTC, and now my current role, one of the things that we do that I'm very proud of is we build a lot of tools that make it easier for the public to participate in government processes, like rulemaking and other things. And, you know, unfortunately, we kind of found that the last administration was a high watermark for inviting the public in to comment and get information. And we're seeing a real receding of that under the current chair, Ferguson. And that included, I don't know exactly what the status is, but they weren't even, for a while, allowing public comment on this workshop, which is against practice. And you know, I'm just gonna take privilege from having a microphone. I just want to go back to something I think was saying and point out that one of the most popular things that the FTC has ever done was they've been charged of the do not call registry, which worked phenomenally for a while until it didn't. And so if you're looking for things that will actually make people happy, what you do is to fix do not call and make it work again, especially considering that so many of the texts and calls that come through are scams that can target elderly. And, you know, we've been thinking about expanding it to include, you know, do not track, do not aggregate when it comes to data. Other ways that consumers can signal and take that, some of their rights to their personal autonomy.
I'll just add that, you know, we were ramping up our FTC to a really important rulemaking effort on commercial surveillance, and a lot of great work was going into that. And one of the things that we would have benefited from, all of us, from that process would have been a public hearing, which is a critical part of the national rulemaking process, where, you know, any corporate players in this that wanted to take a position on this issue, on the scope of the rules and the proceeding, would have to appear and speak their piece and be subject to questions from the public, which we really don't get. And one thing that I think that we've, you know, not had over the years as advocates and as consumers, given the nature of the FTC process, always is full transparency, given that investigations are done right within the agency, and we don't get all the information out of those investigations. And if there's a settlement, because it's a good outcome, you know, it is written in settlement language in terms of, you know, disclaiming responsibility and sort of noting past actions without committing to exactly what happened. So I think that element of public transparency and being present to actually make these companies answer questions about what they're doing is something that's we're missing and we need more of.
I think I would like to add here personally, having sat and watched the entire workshop yesterday, I would like the FTC to breathe more of the research. I think it is much harder for individuals to stand or to sit in some cases up on that workshop and to claim that the suicide risks of unsupported transgender youth are quote unquote myths, which we heard all the time yesterday. I think that's harder to make those claims when you have incredible research like the Trevor projects in front of you. And I think it's harder to claim that there is, no positive outcome for this sort of medical care when you hear our stories, like on sort of the other end from our community and from our transgender siblings. And that was not a part of the equation yesterday, was the research. So that's kind of my self-pushing input on that. Let's see.
Shay, can I say something?
Absolutely.
Honestly, I don't know that there's anyone working at the FTC who would understand the research if they read it. It is simply not the area of expertise of the staff at the Federal Trade Commission. Maybe things have changed, but there weren't any physicians on the staff or any, any people with doctorates in relevant areas when I was on the staff at the FTC. It's just, Ferguson gave a talk when he was a commissioner, I think, to talk about the importance of the FTC staying in its lane. Hello?
Well, you break my heart, but I hope that the FTC has some heart as well. And if nothing else, that reading some research and some stories would at least make those swell, but who knows who's tomorrow. All right, so we have just under 10 minutes left in the panel, and I really do want to offer the opportunity for each of the panelists to give final thoughts, on either what happened yesterday, on what comes next, on what should happen moving forward. Just kind of open the floor to your final thoughts.
Well, I'll just add to the many really powerful things that have been said on both of these panels, that I hope this is a low point for the FTC. We need to get back to this agency taking the mantle that importantly has been given over 100 years of protecting American consumers from financial exploitation and protecting people's privacy. Shameless plug, from a privacy organization, I think that the FTC has a lot of work to do. And I hope that we can get back to it soon.
So I was at the FTC when we did not call. I led that effort. And Dave Gary said this is the most popular thing the federal government has done since the Aldous scam. The FTC needs to get back to that. There's a big debate in the country about what we need to do to get back together as a nation. And there are important consumer protection and antitrust issues that people really agree on and make a difference in people's lives. The FTC needs to be focused on those and show itself to be a common sense, civic-minded agency that it was created to be in 1914. And so, I really hope that Congress, which has oversight and authority here, insists that the FTC get back to the business of protecting consumers in the marketplace from economic harms. That is its purpose. And I hope that the transcript or the record here that's being created that should have been part of the record yesterday is provided to the oversight and authorizing committees, and that everybody here tells them, hey, pay attention here. The FTC is off track. Makes the 1970s look like they were on track. And so let's get the FTC back on track here, protecting consumers.
The FTC is a small but mighty organization. That also means they're incredibly resource constrained. So what they focus on, they spend their attention on matters. And when they spend their attention on something, that means that something else is, the ball is being dropped, there's no one focused on it. I mean, a lot of medical practice was trying to get them to look at one area instead of another. And so I think that it's very disheartening that we see them wading into waters they don't belong, creating work that doesn't need to be done. I mean, the FTC is a consumer protection agency, whether that comes to prices or privacy or data or scams or misinformation, all of that stuff. That is their lane. And when they do that stuff well, they're popular. The FTC puts out a regular report for what their budget is compared to how much money they return to consumers. And it's always impressive. And I can't imagine that going after DEI or, transparent is going to be adding to that number in any way, shape, or form without money they're saving consumers. So they just need to get back to what they're built for.
Thank you, and I did not necessarily intended to do this, but I think I'm going to end this panel with a few thoughts of my own. And that is actually with the message that I would like to send specifically to the LGBTQ plus community, because that is, again, the center of what we're here to talk about, because they were not centered. Our sentiments on this panel have been, more technical in nature than anything else, but I think realistically, they are also grounded in a deep hurt that this is the focus of the FTC right now. And again, it's not just inappropriate, but it is actually wrong. We know that no one knows it's okay to be something until you either see someone being okay being that thing, or someone tells you it's okay to be that thing. And yesterday, there were a lot of transgender individuals who saw a lot of really powerful people tell them that it was not okay to be something that they are. I am afraid of the reverberations that kind of platform in this kind of government is going to have. But I do also want to say that for every push on that one side, there are always going to be people like us and people in this room and people who fight to push back. We will continue to protect ourselves and protect each other, and that sentiment prevails. Thank you for taking the time. I want to send my deepest gratitude to these panelists. Your voices, your names on the record are going to be so important and so impactful for pushing back on what we saw yesterday and for proving that that's not the majority of opinion. I want to extend that same deep gratitude to those who spoke on the panel earlier. I am not going to be introducing the next speakers, but talk about powerful voices. I am very, very excited for y'all to hear from them. So, public knowledge, I pass it out to you. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited for our next three speakers. This will round out the end of the live portion of this event. First, we have former Commissioner Alvaro Bedoya speaking with us, and then we will be seeing current Commissioner, if not allowed in her office, Becca Slaughter. Both of which have deep expertise in fields that I really care about, which is practicing competition, and also expertise on what the FTC should be doing here. And then finally, you'll hear from my president and CEO, Chris Lewis. We've got a lot of questions about why we decided to host this, and I think his speech will explain, but here's a hint: consumer protection should protect everyone.
It is wonderful to be here. I'm grateful for this church for hosting this event, for the groups that made it possible, and for seeing all of you. I want to start honestly by talking about where we are right now in July 2025. We have people defaulting on their car notes at a 30-year high. We have people drawing down retirement accounts early because of emergencies at an all-time high. It is harder and harder to find a doctor who will see you. Every time you go to the doctor, you get this flurry of nonsense bills, $15, $35, $50, $100, $150. And heaven forbid you have to go to the hospital. Heaven forbid, because private equity firms are buying up community hospitals. They are selling out the land from under them, forcing those hospitals to rent back the land that they sit on, going to the ICU nurses and saying, oh no, you won't have to take care of one bed, one patient, 2 beds, 2 patients. You're gonna have to take care of 4 patients, 5 patients, 6 patients. And what happens? What happens is that people die. Every single study of private equity takeovers of these hospitals results in an increase in mortality, literally people dying. let's talk about what's happening with small business in this country. I personally, I support tariffs, right? I support tariffs if they're going to protect American workers. What I don't support are insane chaos tariffs. And if you talk to small businesses in this country, most of them will tell you they are scared about what's about to happen. And yet, you have one big box store after another, one billionaire retailer after another, literally putting down in writing, we will not pay for one more penny on the products you sell to their suppliers. Which quite literally means that those suppliers, which also supply the mom and pop bodega down the street, the rural grocer in rural America, that those suppliers cannot abide by the law that requires them to provide a level playing field for the big box store and the little guy, the mom and pop grocer and retailer. And what's happening to those grocers and retailers? They're failing. They're going out of business one after another. And they're the ones that actually serve the areas that those billionaire big box companies don't consider it profitable to serve. But what's steady through this chaos? What's steady through, what's ticking through the chaos tariffs and the new wars and the raids and the weird videos about the raids on social media? Scams. Little text messages you get saying, hey, I'm Ashley from this recruiting company. We got a great job for you. Or, hey, Jack, I didn't see you at the store today. Where were you? Oh, you're not Jack? Oh, interesting. Who are you? And of course, the scam follows, right? I have personally, I'm sure Commissioner Slaughter has personally talked to consumers who are defrauded of the entirety of their life savings, the entirety of their retirements through scams like this, right? And we have an agency. We have one agency that is custom built to fight all of these things, that has decades of experience stopping these things, that can take the few resources they have right now, that 1 or 2 or 3 slots that maybe they can hire into, the focus of one single day across the agency, and use it to fight any of these things. And every single person would be for it, right? I think Eileen mentioned this. We are at a time when seemingly no one can agree on anything, right? But one thing most people, an astounding number of people can agree on, is that we're getting ripped off, that everything is too expensive, and that billionaires are taking advantage of us. And are the leaders of this agency doing that? Are they taking that one day of focus, those 1, those 2, those maybe 3 slots, to try to fight billionaire fraudsters and monopolists? No. They're using it to fight the culture war. They're using it to get clout on social media. They're using it for their own political careers and for their own personal ambitions. And let me tell you, I've been in this town 17, maybe 18 years. I'm used to being around ambitious people, but holy heck, what a lot. What a lot. And so my message to the trans and non-binary people that may be listening is there is nothing wrong with you. Not one thing. I admire you. I respect you. That is what you deserve, and that is what the law in your workplace demands. And you should get nothing less. So with that, I just want to say thank you for having me. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. I have no idea where the camera is. I guess it's up there. Hello, thank you for watching. My hope is that it will get better. It will get better soon. I don't know when, but it will. And so I hope everyone hangs on and we make it through together. Let me pass it over to my wonderful friend.
Hi, friends.
In this and all things, I aspire to be as articulate as Alvaro extemporaneously, and that continues to be an aspirational goal. So I have notes to speak from. I want to start by thanking everyone for organizing this really important space today, opportunity today for being in this beautiful space. I want to thank the parents, care providers who shared their stories and their expertise, Representatives Raskin and Cross for their powerful statements, and my friends and former FTC colleagues, Eileen and Alvaro, and everyone participating here tonight. My name is Becca Kelly Slaughter, and I have served as an FTC commissioner since 2018. My views today are my own, and obviously do not represent the commission or any other commissioners. I'm going to start by sharing a few of those views that I think are so anodyne as to basically approach statements of fact. The first is that I'm an FTC commissioner. I was appointed by President Trump in 2018. I was reappointed by President Biden. I was unanimously confirmed by the Senate 2 times, including last year, to a term that ends in 2029, and I intend to serve that term. Alvaro and I are currently in court fighting to uphold that right, but it will not stop me from caring about the issues that the FTC should be working on, the issues that the FTC is involving itself in, I think inappropriately, and the people that the FTC is supposed to be serving, the American people. So that's fact number 1. Fact number 2, the role of the United States government is to secure access to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is not to sow fear, cause pain, or promote discrimination. And a third fact, transgender people are people. Transgender people deserve what all Americans deserve: the full protection of the law to be able to live their lives with dignity and respect, and to pursue their happiness free of discrimination. Each of these self-evident truths were challenged at the truly bizarre event held at the FTC yesterday. The reason I had to make a bunch of notes is that it's difficult to enumerate all the ways in which that event was weird. To begin with, what business is it of the FTC to get involved in people's private healthcare decisions? The answer is none. It is none of the FTC's business what people do with their private healthcare decisions. And beyond the subject matter of the workshop being out of bounds, the structure was truly odd. Eileen Harrington, who served the FTC with distinction for decades under leaders of both political parties, already exhaustively demonstrated how radical and aberrant this so-called workshop was. Only one set of views, the public not allowed to attend, no associated public comment docket, applause lines like at a political rally, and also strange was the taxpayer-funded steak and shrimp lunch. But the worst part was the content. Wild, vitriolic, conspiratorial, unbalanced, dehumanizing. The general sentiment repeated over and over was some variation of, it is impossible to be born into the wrong body. What they were saying, in other words, was, it is impossible that transgender people exist. But trans people do exist. I know this because trans people are my neighbors. They are my friends. They attend my synagogue. They are my colleagues at the FTC. You know this. So do most Americans. This reality was wholly absent from yesterday's sham workshop, a result of having a hyper-partisan commission with all dissenting voices involuntarily removed. If I were allowed to do my job as an FTC commissioner,
I would have tried hard to convince my colleagues to focus on all the pressing issues within the FTC's actual jurisdiction that we heard about on the previous panel and that Alvaro just enumerated so clearly and powerfully, like the price of groceries, medicine, and housing. If I were unsuccessful at that, I would have pushed them at a minimum to hear from different perspectives, as we always have. As President Trump's last FTC chair, Joe Simons, always ensured. Maybe I would have succeeded, maybe not. But Americans deserve a commission that works as Congress intended, a bipartisan body that relies on its expert staff and procedures and produces better work because of robust internal debate. Chairman Ferguson has recognized the importance of that debate and dissent. He said on a podcast the day before President Trump reported to fire myself and Alvaro. He said, if you have an agency that is exceeding the law, abusing the companies that it purports to regulate, it's helpful for markets, for courts, for litigants, for government transparency to have people in the other party pointing this out and saying it in dissents. I wrote 400 plus pages of dissents during my time as a minority commissioner, which was less than a year. That's the end of it. He didn't say the part less than a year. I did. This is the same Andrew Ferguson, who late last year delivered a speech, as Eileen pointed out, titled, and neither of us are making this up, Staying in Our Lane, Resisting the Temptation of Using Consumer Protection Law to Solve Other Problems. I did contemplate just putting together a speech that was quotes, like rearranged quotes from that was, it's like camp seasons, it's crazy with my kids, so I couldn't. Chairman Ferguson's hyper-partisan crusade against healthcare for trans people is not just out of the FTC's lane, it is out of bounds factually, legally, and ethically. And I think it's important to ask why the chairman is so afraid of views that differ from his own. As Eileen mentioned, every workshop the FTC has ever held, to our knowledge, has included a public comment docket until the last month. Workshops were about learning, not lecturing. That was true until the partisan FTC workshop on kids and big tech last month on June 4th, a workshop that was developed normally for months, but was taken away from career staff by the chairman's office. They took a professional workshop on a serious issue and turned it into a one-sided break session with no public comment docket. This is part of a pattern. Chairman Ferguson seems very anxious about public feedback and dissent. This is a chairman who has not held a single open commission meeting in his 6 months on the job. His first act as chairman was pulling down a number of open requests for public comment on vitally important issues. He truly seems to avoid hearing from the public at all costs. It's not only worth asking why, it's worth pushing back strongly. And I'm gratified that this seems to be happening. When Chairman Ferguson announced his partisan workshop about trans kids and again refused to open a comment docket, this time people pointed it out. Members of Congress, the tremendous FTC career staff, reporters and others, and the dedicated civil society groups putting on this gathering have announced their own public comment docket to do what the FTC should have been doing all along, listening to the public. I hope that Chairman Ferguson will, in fact, open a public comment record for yesterday's workshop. A comment record that can be filled with real facts, real experiences, and real science, which the FTC would have to read and assess before taking action or writing a record-based report to influence policy. And in the meantime, I encourage everyone to comment both on the civil society organization's comment page that is available today and on the FTC's if it becomes available. It's easy to do, and it's vitally important. But the FTC did yesterday, and what it is threatening to do to transgender Americans and the healthcare providers who serve them is an abomination. On behalf of a once great agency, I am so sorry. Still, I am optimistic that we can stop the madness and get the FTC back in its lane, fighting against monopolists and fraudsters and scam artists. And I'll just point out that while Alvaro was talking about the ongoing constant barrage of scams, I got 3 separate scam texts. one, inviting me to check my Coinbase account, which I do not have. The second, recruiting me for a job that does not exist, and that they're telling me I owed, like, some kind of a toll, some highway provider. So, it is true, these are real, these are pressing problems. Here's why I'm optimistic. We have the facts on our side, we have the law on our side, and we have each other, and that matters. So I thank you all very much for your participation today, and it is really my privilege to turn it over to my friend Chris for this.
All right, that is hard to follow. I'm going to close this out with just a few thoughts and reflections, because this has been a fantastic program today. Kudos to everyone who organized and participated in it. Sorry we don't have a mushroom steak lunch for you. But as I'll remind folks, including folks who are watching the live stream, sorry if we've had some technical difficulties with sound, but we are not the government. We are some small nonprofits trying to make a difference here, and we're doing the best we can. So forgive us for any technical difficulties, forgive us for not having a steak and lunch. But it's important that we did this today, because the FTC's workshop yesterday was rooted in bias, not in protecting Americans, and you've heard it all day today. Their title, their premise, their content presumes harm without grounding in scientific or medical consensus. And it politicizes a medical issue. It politicizes a relationship between your doctor and yourself. And it ignores decades of peer-reviewed research and professional standards. And this is why public knowledge, and I'll speak for us, we have wonderful co-hosts at LGBTQ Tech and for the future, this is why we're here. Co-hosting this kind of workshop. If you know us, or if you don't know the title, we're a tech policy shop. We're not experts in healthcare. And yet when my team brought this to me, I was excited. It was an easy yes to participate. Because number one, as tech policy advocates, we believe in the value of the internet and open access to knowledge and information. And online, so many teams who are learning about their identities, access information and knowledge about healthcare. That has been the difference between a healthy life or, in the worst cases, the tragic life of children suicide. And so we're proud to partner as hosts for this discussion with actual medical experts on our first panel, because that's not us. Whose knowledge and expertise was not welcome at the FTC yesterday. Yesterday's workshop really undermines the credibility of the FTC, an agency that we've worked at and advocated for years. Its platform, politically motivated claims, and it really risks the FTC being seen as a partisan actor rather than a neutral consumer watchdog that we need and deserve. And I fear that it may erode the public trust in the Commission's ability to set fair, evidence-based enforcement priorities. And this is exacerbated by its removal of its two Democratic commissioners, the structure that Congress intended when it created the agency, a multi-member agency that had a balance of views. And I believe if they were allowed in the building, we would not have seen what we saw yesterday. The FTC, excuse me, sometimes I slip because I used to work at the FCC with all the acronyms here in Washington. The FTC's influence, if it was an effective agency, would be grounded in evidence. And its workshops and public events would shape public perception and be legitimized or delegitimized based on facts, based on studies, based on data and not ideology. We've fought for years to have the FTC have more resources because of all the scams that you've heard about, because of all the work that we're in the second panel that needs to be done to protect people's privacy and protect consumers and protect us against monopoly and brutal competition. That should be its core focus. That should be its daily work, spending our taxpayer dollars to protect all of ourselves in those ways to fight digital platforms who are creating deceptive and manipulative algorithms and designs, to fight the widespread data exploitation that we're seeing of all of us, and especially our minors, to fight payment fees and consumer fraud. And so we're going to continue that fight. But we're also going to stand up for access to knowledge and information that helps all Americans, especially our folks in the LGBTQ community, to build a better life for themselves. So we're very proud to be here. We want to thank a few folks before we close out. First of all, thank you to St. Thomas Episcopal Church for being our host in our venue today. We really appreciate them welcoming us with open arms here in Washington, D.C. Thank you to Commissioner Slaughter and former Commissioner Bedoya for their inspirational remarks and their presence here. We want to thank Congressman Frost and Congressman Rankin for their videos that contribute to the program, and the inspirational words and expertise from all the speakers today, particularly Amy Harris, and yes, the mother of this program, Eileen Harrington, who I learned so much from just listening to her talk. And we want to also shout out our experts and friends at the FTC, the career public servants who, as a DC area native, yes, those of us who are from here, have spent a career and a life making our community better, but also making our country better. For those of you who feel threatened right now, we want to watch you should know that we're in your corner. And thank you to our co-hosts at LGBTQ Tech, Fight for the Future, Chris and Carlos and the team of LGBTQ Tech. We love working with you, Sarah, Evan, and Matt, who spoke earlier, and the whole team at Fight for the Future. We're going to continue this fight, and we hope all of you online will support this and participate as if this was an open proceeding. Commissioner Slaughter mentioned it, but I'll give you the link, culturewarversusconsumerprotection.com. Culturewarversusconsumerprotection.com is where you can go to give your own comments. Again, we're not the government, we're going to do the best we can to collect them and share them. I think we're going to try and share them with the FTC, even though they don't have their comments open for the public, because that's how this process is supposed to work. Not sure that this fortunate would even happen, but if you're going to hold it, how about FTC, you follow your procedures and do it this way. So we're taking your comments. If you'd like to tell commissioners how you feel, we are open at culturewarversusconsumerprotections.com. You can send those in. And with that, we want to thank you all for watching online, for being here in person, and we'll follow this afternoon. Thank you all.
Hi everyone,
and dehumanized, but we know the truth. And as I've traveled the country, I can say that people know the truth too, that the reason they can't pay their rent has nothing to do with the trans person and everything to do with corporations that are hiking up their rent week after week, month after month. That the fact that people can't pay for their groceries has nothing to do with an immigrant person and everything to do with price gouging and everything to do with these companies and the wealth inequality in this country that has taken advantage of working people for not decades, but generations. And the FTC has a proud history, especially over the 4 years of the Biden administration, of being at the forefront of fighting corporate monopolies and fighting on behalf of all working people, whether Democrat, Republican, or anything. And that's what we need the FTC to focus on, not this bullshit, bigoted agenda meant to appease Donald Trump. And so I stand with all of you. I appreciate your work. We sent a letter to the FTC on this. We know the letters are okay, right? But what we really need is action, and what you're doing today is really important. Thank you. God bless you all. This is Congressman Maxwell Alejandro Frost, proudly representing Florida's 10th Congressional District. And I just wanted to tap in. Number one, sorry I couldn't be there with you today at this very important counter-programming to this bigoted and horrible and homophobic event that the FTC is hosting. And I just really appreciate, number one, everybody that's part of this event, the people telling their stories, sharing their testimony. And also, I want to apologize to the staff at the FTC, especially our LGBTQ plus staff that have to endure this gross misuse of taxpayer dollars and this gross misuse of what the FTC is supposed to be. An organization that really works at protecting consumers and not being used for this fascist and bigoted agenda where Donald Trump seeks to take the blame off of the billionaires and corporations and place it on the LGBTQ plus community and place it on immigrants and place it on people that he wants to otherize and dehumanize. But we know the truth. And as I've traveled the country, I can say that people know the truth too, that the reason they can't pay their rent has nothing to do with the trans person and everything to do with corporations that are hiking up their rent week after week, month after month. That the fact that people can't pay for their groceries has nothing to do with an immigrant person and everything to do with price gouging and everything to do with these companies and the wealth inequality in this country that has taken advantage of working people for not decades, but generations. And the FTC has a proud history, especially over the 4 years of the Biden administration, of being at the forefront of fighting corporate monopolies and fighting on behalf of all working people, whether Democrat, Republican, or anything. And that's what we need the FTC to focus on, not this bullshit, bigoted agenda meant to appease Donald Trump. And so I stand with all of you. I appreciate your work. We sent a letter to the FTC on this. We know the letters are okay, right? But what we really need is action, and what you're doing today is really important. Thank you. God bless you all.
Hey everybody, it's Congressman Jamie Raskin from Maryland's beautiful 8th Congressional District. I'm sorry I can't be with you in person today, but I wanted to just send you a video expressing my solidarity. The FTC's so-called workshop is not only a witch hunt against children and their families, but it's also way out of state governments over a matter that is within state control. Never before has the FTC intervened in this way between a patient and their doctor, much less parents and children. So this is a ham-fisted bludgeon approach to a public policy issue which is being dealt with just fine at the state level. The FTC's jurisdiction is over unfair and deceptive practices in interstate commerce. It's not its jurisdiction to, quote, second guess established medical standards widely accepted by experts in the field based on their professional judgment, or to overrule family and clinical decision making. The FTC really should stay in its lane and stop these efforts to demonize the trans community, and they should certainly not be interfering between parents and children and doctors and their patients. Sending solidarity to everybody. Hang tough, everyone, for freedom and for the rights of families.